Hey everybody, welcome to episode 12 of that JRPG podcast. Today is about Valkyrie Profile, a game that I probably should have covered before I covered the sequel, which is my second favorite JRPG of all time. I couldn't resist, but there's also a reason why I covered that one first, and that's because I played that first. So today I'm finally here to do justice to the first game, which is a masterpiece and a strongly recommended JRPG. And I usually start these episodes with my story with the game, but well, to be completely honest, some of the previous episodes have had an interesting story and that I told before and I retold in the episodes. But I'll be honest, with the Valkyrie Profile, there's nothing to tell. I just found out about the game randomly online, downloaded the ROM, burned it into a CD, a couple of CDs actually, and I play the game and I fell in love with it. That's the end. There's no special story, unfortunately. So that's it. That's my story with the game. Why am I such a big fan of it? Why do I love it so much? Why do I hold it in such a high regard? Well, you're gonna find out about all of that in today's episode. Let's start by talking about what this game's about. This is a... Oh, by the way, I want to clarify that I'll be covering all versions because I've played them all, which are PS1, PSP, and it's a remaster. No, it's not a remaster. It's more like a port with upscale graphics on PlayStation 4/5. Okay. Oh, okay. I haven't played the phone's version. Yeah, the game is available for iOS and Android, and I don't give a flying fuck about that version. If you do, and that's how you're gonna play the game, good for you, man. More power to you. I don't give a shit. I'm covering the console versions. So, Valkyrie Profile. What's this game about? Well, this is a game about based on the Norse mythology. As always with any Japanese game based on religion or mythologies or whatever, it does take some liberties, of course, some depiction of the characters. But at the same time, some depiction of the characters are kind of like, okay, that's probably not what it says in the Norse mythology, but like I said, it's a mythology. I think we should start from there. People need to know that it isn't exactly considered 100% a religion, because there's barely any facts, and today it remains a mythology, and it's referred to as mythology. Unlike, I don't know, Catholicism, or Christianism or Buddhism, which have established stories and books and blah, 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 and all that jazz. And our religions are practiced nowadays. The Norse thing is not really a religion. It's a mythology, but it was back in the day for Vikings and all that jazz. Okay, I don't want to get into that because we are going to digress a lot if we go into that topic. But let's just say that based on what it says in most books and articles out there about the Norse mythology, the developers of this game, the company 3Ace, also known as Tri-Ace, everybody pronounces it Tri-Ace, including me, but it's actually, the Japanese pronunciation is 3Ace, So, whatever. I digress. So it's a game. The developers really. If you play this game, you can really tell the developers made a lot of research based on the Norse mythology, but it's Japan and they can't help themselves. These guys just can't help themselves adding fantasy elements and fiction and twisting the facts a little bit, or twisting without really altering real events, But the Norse mythology isn't exactly something real, but you get what I mean. So there's an Odin, there's a Freya, Valkyries, the Ragnarok War, all of these are stories that we've seen in the Norse mythology a lot. That's what I'm trying to say. It's just hard to say it sticks to the facts because it isn't 100% a fact. So, you get the idea. They added a lot of fucking things. So, leaving that aside, this is a game whose story is very similar to the stories that stand out a lot, or the main stories that happen in the Norse mythology, which you got these goths, living in Asgard, which is basically heaven, and you got humans living in Midgard, which is basically Earth. Okay, And in Asgard, you got the main guy, the leader. There's two races of gods in Asgard, and according to the Norse mythology, and also in this game, each wants to rule over Midgard, over humans, So that's why they start a war. But this war, because the gods are fighting it, is supposedly going to destroy the world. So it's the Norse mythology kind of twisted version of the apocalypse, And this apocalypse is known as Ragnarok, the Ragnarok War, okay? So a lot of humans in Midgard grow up with the beliefs that if they die, and if they were warriors or if they were like not warriors in the sense of fighting or fighters, not necessarily that. I mean, also in the sense of fighters, but also people that have this warrior ability, this mentality of fighting, for their beliefs or for being strong, So people grow up with that mentality in Midgard, which is kind of like we've something we've seen in the Vikings. There's been a lot of Vikings shows in the past several years. And they kind of respect that, their beliefs, the beliefs of the Vikings, that when they die, a Valkyrie is going to come down from Asgard and take their soul and revive them in heaven, well, in this case, Asgard, to fight in the war, So it's the two races of gods that exist in there are the Vaesir and the Aesir and the Vanir, okay? So the leader of the Aesir is Odin, okay, and he has an assistant, a beautiful assistant known as Freya, and he commands 3 Valkyrie sisters who are nothing but goddesses' souls who share the same physical body, but there can only be one soul inhabiting that body. So according to the circumstances and to the lore of the game, this is not anymore about the Norse mythology. According to the lore of the video game Valkyrie Profile, these, depending on the circumstances, Odin may sometimes say, okay, Lenneth should be the 3 sisters from eldest to youngest are Hrist. That's hard to pronounce, but it's Hrist, 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 Lenneth, and Silmeria. Okay, so now that you know all of that, Odin decides that is for whatever reason it's time to send Lenneth, okay, into Midgard so she can start recruiting warriors or people, to bring to heaven. But obviously these warriors need to be dead. Okay, she can't just find soldiers or warriors or powerful mercenaries or merchants or whatever, that have this power gene, this warrior gene, this fighter gene, inside, enough to be considered as, to be able to fight in the Ragnarok war in heaven, or in Asgard, So obviously she just can't go and transport these living beings, to Asgard, No, they need to die or they need to be killed. So Lenneth, however, it is in Lenneth's job to kill them. She needs to go down and find these souls from these bodies, that are about to die. That, there's this warrior, that I sense this warrior might meet his doom soon. And, well, he looks like he could be, really powerful, or that he could serve well in the war. So I'm going to wait until they die, or he dies or she dies. There's some female warriors too. And then I'll take him to Valhalla. Valhalla is a sanctuary in Asgard where the warriors are trained. It's basically their base of operations, so they can train and then fight in the war. Okay. Why is it important for me to tell you all this fucking lore? But probably most of you who clicked on this video already know the game and you're like, dude, you're giving me a fucking lecture on the game. I already know what it's about. I know about the Norse mythology. I already played the game, Well, there's always that one guy, who's listening to this episode who hasn't played the game or who hasn't finished it, hasn't played it in a long time, and I was just refreshing their memory. But I think that's one of the reasons. But the other reason is to make a point about something that I will explain later, that this game is not only the two main topics, aren't war and mythology, Actually, if you pay attention to this game, the two main topics are love, the romance between the two main characters, which I'll get to in a bit, or the fight against the system. I will explain that. So, well, actually, I will explain most of that during the spoilers section, okay? Because to explain why this is basically one of those stories that are against the oppressive system or governments or corporations, you name it. You as the player decide which kind of metaphor, or allegory, you want to base this game on, but it's crystal clear about that, and I'll explain that during the spoiler section. But basically, it's what I can tell you right now without spoiling anything is that it's basically the story of a woman, in this case Lenneth, or a goddess, or someone, let alone a guy or a girl, let alone a woman or goddess or whatever, let's forget about the gender. It's about a human being that belongs to this powerful organization, being gods, in this case, and how this person rebels, how this person slowly starts finding out everything wrong between the relationship of the gods, the people in power, and the humans, which are the working class, basically, So it is a story about rebellion, not revenge, more about rebellion, more about standing up, more about seeing, I have power. I have the power to help the oppressed working class, the people who make money, Whatever your political or social beliefs, it's the same fucking thing. This is someone who is in a position of power that can do something about it and can defeat the system and destroy the system. Okay? So that's one of the reasons. You know me, I fucking despise the system and governments and corporations and whatnot. Even though I am in favor of capitalism, I want to point that out first, I am in favor of capitalism, but capitalism, like all the other political, currents, is full of flaws, and it is something controlled by human beings. It can be communism, socialism, capitalism, whatever ism, and it's always going to be corrupted, no matter what, by human beings. But capitalism makes a little bit more sense to me. Why? That has nothing to do with today's episode. So, well, let's leave that aside and go back to Valkyrie fucking Profile. I just want to point that out. So, in this game, you play as Lenneth. And the story starts with a little girl, 14-year-old girl called Platina. Beautiful girl with silver platinum hair, Her parents are very poor and are pretty mean and they're a fucking piece of shit, both of them. So they decide that in order to get money, the best thing to do is sell Platina into slavery. That's how dark this fucking game is. And that's another reason why I love this game so much, is because of that. Because unlike most JRPGs, which are pretty lighthearted, and then there's some dark things in there, and that's it, the power of friendship, blah, 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 this is totally fucking different. You play this game and often you start questioning if it's really a JRPG. Because most of you, before playing this game, probably played a lot of JRPGs that are more about the power of friendship and teenagers saving the world and blah, blah, blah. And no, this is nothing of the sort. This is a fully grown-ass woman, a goddess, going into planet Earth, Midgard, and recruiting characters to fight in the war. And there's a lot of darkness with every character, because this is a game that's not exactly linear, but we'll get to that. Okay, so Platina is sold into slavery, but her childhood friend, best friend, love interest, Lucian, decides that it's best to take her away and run away together, So they go into this field, and it's a blooming season for the type of flower that is poisonous to humans. So they don't know that because they're teenagers, So they go in there and they find, some kind of emotional shelter in there. But unfortunately, Platina inhales the poison too much and dies. And that's all. Sometime later, Lenneth Valkyrie, Lenneth's Odin. I want to explain this in a way that makes fucking sense, because oh my god, Odin puts Lenneth's soul into a human body. Okay, the human body is shared by the three sisters that I mentioned before. So it's Lenneth's turn to go back to Midgard, and do her job. So he and Freya tell her she needs to go there and blah blah blah, and off she goes. And so it is implied early in the game, this isn't something about the ending, it is strongly implied that Lenneth is basically Platina. Basically Odin used Platina's body and put Lenneth's soul in there. That's all I'm gonna say. You probably at this point you probably wonder, but isn't she a 14-year-old girl? We'll get to that in the end. That's a spoiler section, okay? So for now, that's all you need to know, and you already know that. And why does that mean that much to me? Because I think this is a very leaving the spiritism aside of putting one person's soul into some body. I mean, that doesn't exist. Leaving that aside, I don't have a strong opinion on that, and I don't want to get into that topic because it's very interesting, but very gray, not black and white. I want to get into the fact that this is a character, like I mentioned before, that has a job to do, and immediately since the beginning starts noticing that something's completely wrong. That this... another interesting metaphor for this game, another interesting allegory in comparison is to compare all of this game's plot and narrative to that of an army, of the army mentality, of the military mentality across the world. It doesn't matter the country, and how countries, warmonger countries, like the US, Russia, the powers, that be, or during the world wars, all the powers that were involved, how these armies, all these generals and politicians, they send hundreds of thousands, if not millions of soldiers to fight a war for them. Instead of them going themselves and talking things through, no, they decide to use violence, and they grab a bunch of people, train them, brainwash them, and they feed them the idea that they're defending their country, when in reality they are defending these fucking politicians and these fucking cowards. They aren't going to lift a single finger to go to the war. They're not gonna go and fight them in the war. They're not gonna pick up a fucking weapon. They're just gonna give orders, and hide in their fucking mansions, And if you compare this game to that, it is basically that. Lenneth, throughout the adventure, realizes that, she starts feeling like, what the fuck is wrong with Odin and Freya and these guys? They don't give a shit about humans. To them, humans are just tools, in this case soldiers, to be sent to war and fight so they can stay in power. Right? Am I wrong or what? So Lenneth, you understand something. Lenneth, I know I'm nerding out because Lenneth is she's my favorite female character of all time in video games. I fucking love her. If I made top 10s about this, I made a top 10 favorite girls in JRPGs, and she was my number one, and she still to date is my number one because of this. Probably because I relate to her a lot. Now, I don't have any power, I've never been in a position of power in my life. Maybe when I worked in Blockbuster, when I was like one of those sub-managers, and never mind that. I've never been in a position of power, okay? But I relate to her that, she lived an oppressed life not for her race or anything, but for her way of thinking or way of seeing things, and realizing that things are wrong in the system, and she decides to fight it, So I like those types of characters. I don't like the types of characters that side, with the politicians. That's a Suikoden thing, and I talked about that in the Suikoden 2 episode. Maybe one day I'll do another episode based on another Suikoden game, probably 5, which is my favorite, And I do have a lot to say about that because it changes your perspective, especially when you're an adult, in a lot of things, But when I first played this game, I was in my 20s, So I was probably, 22, 23, when I first played this game. So I didn't know shit about a lot of things. And now that I'm 39, I know a lot more about a lot of things. And how Lenneth comes into play. What I'm trying to say is that I was a big fan of her back then when I didn't know shit, and now I'm still a big fan. In fact, I say I'm a bigger fan now than what I was before, That's how I love Lenneth. And she has this personality of being kind of cold. Another reason why I love this character so much is because of her development and how, I mean, the entire game revolves around her. You do get other characters, but they get their 15 minutes of fame. Okay, we'll get to that. But all of the rest of the fucking game is her. Maybe Odin, maybe Loki, which is the main antagonist of the game, and maybe Lucian, her love interest, But 90% of the game revolves around Lenneth and her experiences going through these episodes with each Einherjar. The warriors she recruits are known as Einherjar. That's how it's pronounced. In the Norse mythology, the fallen warriors or dead people, whose souls she will take with her back to Valhalla, so they could fight in the war. So, how it's just incredible how she starts observing all of these dramas, all of these situations these characters go through, and she starts trying to make sense of that, and she voices her concerns with a voice actress whose name is Megan Hollingshead. Yeah, and the only great voice actress in the game, because all the others suck balls. This is a game with pretty bad voice acting. It's not that terrible, I've seen worse. I've seen far worse. We're not talking here about Chaos Wars level of English dub, or Arc Rise Fantasia, or those TurboGrafx 16 games, or Sega Saturn games like Dragon Force, oh my god. Terrible, absolutely hideous, This is just okay, but it's still bad. But the girl, the actress who voices Lenneth, Megan, she does a pretty good job, and she conveys her feelings. It's interesting because the reason why I'm bringing this up is because Lenneth, not just thanks to the voice actress, not only because of that, but also because of the development she goes through by observing these situations they go through. Remember when I mentioned that she's basically Platina? Well, without spoiling too much, she's a goddess, okay? And she's the soul of a goddess, in a human body. And that human has human emotions, human feelings, human memories, So it's just incredible and absolutely beautiful and very interesting how she starts trying to make sense of everything that's happening. She's like, oh, this character did this and that. So as a result, the consequences were this and that. But what was the moral in that? Or is this wrong? Is this right? So slowly she starts questioning that, and that's what... her character couldn't be more humane, because that's how we as humans grow, and that's how we form perspectives and beliefs and ideals, by interacting with other human beings, and by also not only by suffering through our situations, but by observing other people's situations and what they did to overcome them or how they failed in them. So you see where I'm going, right? Yeah, at this point you've realized I'm a fucking massive diehard fan of this character and the message the game has thanks to this character. It's a very character-driven game. It's also story-driven, but it's more of a character-driven game because it all revolves around her. And they could have easily made it about the war. They could have easily gone full Suikoden and just the Valkyrie recruiting characters and going to Asgard and playing in some kind of strategy RPG, I don't know, in the middle of a war. And actually, that sounds fucking awesome, Wow! Maybe there should be a Valkyrie profile like that, where you take your Einherjar to Asgard and actually fight in the Ragnarok war, But no, this isn't a game about that. They could have made it about that, but they made it about a human being in a position of power and what I told you before. So, yeah, I'm a fanboy of Lenneth Valkyrie. I could go on. She's also beautiful. I love her long as fuck braided silver hair, and it's a game with decent fan service. I want to point out that while this game is okay in fan service, it doesn't go overboard. You don't see girls with huge tits or impossible bodies, but you do see some sexiness in there, like Mistina, for example. But no one is sexier than Lenneth. Okay, maybe Freya. So that's it for Lenneth. Let's move on to other characters. There's 24 playable characters in this game, which are the Einherjar, plus the bad guys, plus the other characters, But the ones that are like the main characters, the ones you have a lot of interactions with, and they also have some kind of development, are the ones that I'm going to cover today. I'm not going to go into full detail by the Einherjars. I will make an exception for 4 of them, because they seem to be the most important, which are Arngrim, Mistina, Lucian, and the 4th Einherjar is Jelanda. Okay, those are the only ones. That doesn't necessarily mean they're my favorites. Okay, I like the Dragon Girl, for example, the sexy Dragon Girl you find being tortured. You know, she was one of my favorite characters. I think she was there at the end of my first playthrough. This is a game I've beaten 2 times only. I want to point that out. And you know me, I don't do an episode based on any game unless I've beaten that game at least once. Most of the games that you see me talking in this episode, in that JRPG podcast, are games that I've actually beaten more than once. Others I've only beaten once, you know. But yeah, I feel like I gotta defeat or beat the game to dedicate an entire episode to it. So going back to the characters, so the first character that I want to talk about is actually Freya. Not only because she's fucking super sexy and gorgeous. Forget about that. She's a very interesting character because she is Odin's right hand. And she's basically the commander of all of the Valkyrie. And she actually is the one that gives you the tutorial and explains everything to both you, the player, and Lenneth. You know, and what her mission is and how she can accomplish her mission and all that jazz. So she makes up an appearance in this game. During every chapter, there's several chapters. I forget how many, 10 or 12. And during every chapter, at the end of every chapter, she shows up to analyze how you did, and also to tell you how the war is going on in how Ragnarok is progressing, you know, up there in heaven, which is interesting. But the analytics of that do depend on who you decide to send, because Lenneth's job isn't just to recruit characters and go back with them to heaven, you know. No, she sends them there. Okay, she has the ability to transport them somehow. Let's use that word. Okay, to teleport them to heaven without having to go back. So she just recruits someone, and it's up to you, the player, if you want to send that someone. And this has a lot to do with the endings, but we'll get to that. That's part of the gameplay. Going back to Freya, she's an interesting character because it's a game with 3 endings. There's like a normal ending, the true ending, and the bad ending. The bad ending is never sending anybody to Valhalla, never sending any. You also find a lot of fucking things, artifacts and treasures that are like divine and super rare and important, and you need to also send them to Valhalla, you know. And if you don't send anything and you disobey Freya, she fights you, and she's an impossible boss, you know, an unbeatable boss fight. And if you die, you get the bad ending. It's interesting, do that. I suggest you try that out. It's kind of lame though. There's barely any dialogue or scenes, you know, worth watching, but you know, it's there if you want to get the bad ending. So why am I telling you this? Because Freya isn't exactly an antagonist, but she is if you do that ending. But let's forget about that ending because it's just a dumb joke the game put in there, you know. So the developers put there. So focusing on her character, she's not really an antagonist. She's just a character that obeys Odin, you know, and there are some hints in the game that she starts developing this kind of, I don't want to say consciousness, you know, because she's a conscious woman, you know, more like she starts, I mean, obviously she doesn't travel with Lenneth and recruit characters. She's just there and appears at the end of every chapter to see how she's going, how she's doing, you know. So there's not a lot of empathy, there's barely any empathy between Freya and Lenneth, but you do start seeing Freya kind of trying to empathize with Lenneth and kind of trying to understand where she's coming from in the situation in Midgard. Because while the gods are fighting each other off, you know, up there, the rest of humanity is just fucking suffering and going to hell, you know. The world is fucking trash, you know, and Freya sees that, you know. So I like how a character like Freya isn't exactly portrayed as this just evil, dumb bitch following orders, from Odin and being extremely loyal and no. Most of the time, she's like that. And she's also the same in the sequel, in Silmeria, but we'll get to that. Keep in mind, I want to mention something right now that I didn't mention before. Most of you already know this, but for those who don't know, I actually played the second game first. And I do not recommend that, okay? If you're gonna get into this series, start with this one, the PS1 game, PSP, PS4, whatever. Valkyrie Profile, the first one. Start with this one, because in the second game, you're gonna get a lot of spoilers. And it's gonna ruin certain plot twists and certain things that you will see in the first game. So it's much better to start with this one. And I want to bring that up because it is thanks to this that my appreciation for Freya is different from anybody who has played only the first Valkyrie Profile. If you play this game, you're probably thinking, well, Erick, I don't exactly agree with you and your opinion about Freya. You gotta play the second game, So, but sticking with the Freya from the first game and forgetting the sequel exists, I mean, that's kind of hard to do, but okay, I may develop or create some kind of colder attitude towards Freya, and see her as an evil bitch. She's not evil, but like someone who is like 110% loyal to Odin, and she kind of is. But I like how what little development she gets is that she also, that through her dialogue with Landon and that of the true ending, which I'm not going to get into, you can see how she's like, okay, I understand you, but I am a goddess, and so are you. And this is what we're supposed to do, and I'm loyal to Odin, so shut the fuck up. So I like that. She's an interesting character. She's not just there for the looks. I know she's super hot, but she's not just there for the looks. I like that character. Odin, let's just keep Odin. To be completely honest, he is an important character in this game, but he doesn't get a lot of screen time. He's just there at the beginning and at the end, so we don't really get to meet Odin until, we meet him a little bit more and we see more of him in the second game. But today's episode is about the first game, and there's not that much to say about Odin except the fact that he's just, he comes as a wise commander, a wise leader, but also like completely determined to follow his beliefs and stick to that. He's extremely opinionated, Freya is a bit opinionated too. But she's also like, kind of like she's a little bit more reasonable, and Odin is just that one guy that's like the not the evil commander, but like the commander, your leader, that you as the player and Landon herself disagrees with or starts disagreeing with later on. But she's very fond of him because Odin is basically the creator of the Valkyries. So Landon is basically, in a sense, his daughter. And Freya, in a sense, is also like a mother. Landon sees them as some motherly and fatherly figures, and that's an interesting relationship because that is how you create a multi-dimensional relationship between the main character and these two other characters that could have been just fucking evil, and let's just go and kill them and defeat them because they are part of an oppressive system. And no, I mean, you start seeing this relationship and why they matter to Landon, despite disagreeing with their views and their beliefs up there in heaven, So that's all I gotta say about Odin. He's not that interesting of a character because he's barely there, but he's there. He's interesting and he's very important to the plot. So there you go. Lucian is Landon's love interest, more like Platina's love interest. It's really hard to talk about this character without spoiling, so I'm going to leave his explanation or my thoughts about Lucian and Landon and Platina until the end. What I can say right now is that without knowing that and without seeing that and without finishing this game with the true ending, because if you beat this game with a regular ending, Lucian is like the most forgettable fucking character in the game. And he's not that useful in battle, He's just like okay at best. He's not a bad unit, a bad party member, but he's not a good party member either. He's just there. He exists, And also in terms of personality and plot-related reasons, you kind of like this guy because he saves Platina at the beginning of the game and then Platina dies and he blames himself, for that. And that's all we get to see about him. And later, when he dies and you recruit him as an Einherjar, you expect to see more of that, more scenes and more development, but you don't unless you get the true ending. How to get the true ending, we'll get to that in the gameplay mechanics. So Lucian, without spoilers, he's just a forgettable character. He has the personality of your average, I don't know, not even a JRPG protagonist, not even a sidekick, just an extra guy, He behaves like an NPC, He's interesting, but you need to be in the true ending route, to start appreciating his development and how he starts, never mind. I'll only spoil the game. So Lucian, impossible to define or to discuss without spoilers. So let's move on to Arngrim. Arngrim, okay, so this is where we're actually kind of done with the main characters that appear and talk and participate throughout the entire game. Now we're moving to some of the characters that are only there for like their own arc, their own 15 minutes of fame, and then a little bit more later on. I'm not going to discuss the later on part because that's spoilers. But at the beginning, when you go through their arcs, Arngrim, just let me go real quick because it's been over half an hour and I'm still on the character section. But I'm sorry for nerding out on Valkyrie, on Lenneth Valkyrie, but man, she's my favorite character of all time. So yeah, I needed to. Just real quick, Arngrim is the badass character, that's portrayed as this guy who's grumpy but serious and all about battle. A battle monger type of human being, but he has a brother who is kind of useless in battle, and he's a painter. And as an artist, he creates this kind of duality with Arngrim, which is pretty interesting. And Arngrim also starts developing a sense of not only empathy, but also like broadening his horizons. Like not everything is about war and battle, He keeps telling himself that like I only care about this and that, but not really. There's more to life than that. And then there's Yelanda. So near the very beginning of the game, this is something that happens during the first hour of the game. So Arngrim, succeeds in a mission and he gets praised by the king, but he tells the king in front of his daughter Yelanda that he doesn't give a shit about praising or anything. He just keeps a fuck about battle, and he also thinks that queendoms and kingdoms are fucking trash, the monarchies, so and Yelanda starts resenting him for that. So Yelanda goes because she's secretly in love with him, but she also cannot forgive him for humiliating the king, in front of everybody. So without going into spoilers, let's just say that I liked this relationship between Arngrim and his brother, and also Arngrim and Yelanda, and how he's the classic character that's basically always angry and grumpy and blah 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 and serious and acts like he doesn't give a shit, but deep inside he gives a shit, and he starts giving more of a shit, not just about his brother, but also about Yelanda, and ultimately about Lenneth. How he starts caring for Lenneth? Well, he becomes pretty loyal because when Lenneth tries to send him to Valhalla, Freya rejects him because he's just an uncontrollable piece of shit, So he's not gonna follow orders. And Freya's like, okay, yeah, he's a powerful warrior, but we cannot control this guy, so we don't want him. There, another anti-system mentality, that I was talking about, So just saying, man, that's my interpretation of this game's plot. And therefore, Arngrim gets stuck with Lenneth. Lenneth is like, okay, so help me, in my journey, recruiting all the characters. And he swears loyalty to her, and there you go. Yelanda, he dies also, by the way. How he dies, I'm not going to tell you that. Play the fucking game. So Yelanda also dies, and then Lenneth recruits her, and she becomes an Einherjar. Yelanda is a piece of shit, I never liked her. Even after, I only liked her because Arngrim likes her and because I like Arngrim, and his relationship with her. But as she stands by herself, she's a fucking piece of shit and I have nothing to say about her. As soon as I got a fifth party member, I removed her from my party forever. I don't hate her, I just don't like her. I just think she's a bitch and we don't really see interesting development with her, But she's an important part of the plot for two reasons. First, because she's the first female Einherjar you encounter in the game and you recruit. And she has a lot to do with Arngrim, who is one of the most beloved characters in the game, in the series. So I needed to mention her. The second reason is probably because of that clip on YouTube that's called Yolanda Transforms that has like 10 million views for I don't fucking know why. But the transformation, became so famous, and she became so famous because of that fucking video. Yeah, have you seen that video? It's just a transformation that plays out in the game, but it had like 10 million views. I don't get it. But okay, it's YouTube. So next is okay, the last two that I want to talk about are Lizard and Mistina. Mistina is like Freya in terms of she's super beautiful and hot. And you know what? She's a mage, a really, high profile mage in the game. And she is also a researcher, and she's kind of in cahoots with Lizard in some things. She's very interested in his research that he's doing. Lizard's research is all about trying to attain the power of gods, just trying to get more power and be super powerful. But his motive, his main reasons for doing so is so he can have Lenneth for himself. He has a fucking sick crush on Lenneth, and he wants her. He doesn't care about Silmeria or Hrist. So it's not about the body, because it's the same body no matter what, except when it's Hrist, her hair is purple. And when she's Silmeria, her hair is blonde. He doesn't give a shit. He cares about Lenneth's soul, and he wants her for himself. But as soon as Mistina realizes that, she kind of loses interest, But without spoiling, that's it for the spoilers. Don't worry, sorry about that. But it's something that happens, in the game. But what I found super interesting about Mistina is that despite her not getting the best development, actually, she barely gets any. I like how she has this mentality of being super bored. She actually says that in the game, that she's glad she's dead. She dies, obviously, so you can recruit her as an Einherjar, as a warrior in your party, as a party member. And she says that it's going to be interesting, So I wanted to die to see if there's something more interesting, because life is fucking boring. And the things she says and the things she goes through, in her little arc, it's interesting, how she can be such an overly beautiful and smoking hot woman, and say that life is fucking boring. I don't know, I find this character to be very interesting, and I wish we could have gotten more about her, more development, more dialogue, because she was just an interesting character with a lot of potential. But this is not a game about Mistina or about the party members themselves. They only have their 15 minutes of fame. Some of them get some more, and that's it. Like I said at the beginning, it's more about Lenneth and her relationship with the war and the gods and Lucian, So, I'm not going to say she's wasted potential, but kinda, But I still like her, and I still think Mistina could have easily been a very well-developed character. And finally, Lizard. Remember my previous episode where I covered the second game? Well, I think Lizard Valet really shines in that game, and not in this one. In here, he's just an antagonist that's just kind of there, and there's not a lot of development. It's interesting because if you commit the same mistake as I did, don't do that. But if you somehow you did it first, you play the second game first, you're going to play this first game expecting a lot from Lizard, considering his involvement in the second game. You're going to go back to this game and be like, wow, I expect a lot of shit from Lizard. And no, not really. Again, like the others, he just gets his 15 minutes of fame and that's it. So I'm going to skip Lizard because while he's an interesting character, I already covered him in the previous episode where I covered Silmeria, and he really shines in that game. In this game, he's just a bad guy, crazy madman, very intelligent, but kind of twisted, wanting to have Lenneth for himself. And what else can I say, man? He gets barely any development. All of his important aspects, or my opinion about him, is there in the other episode where I covered Silmeria, the sequel. So right now, Lizard is just like, okay, so that's it. All right, let's get into the gameplay mechanics. First and foremost, I'd like to say that the game, as you may already know, has 3 endings. I already explained to you the bad ending, which is ending C, but there's also endings A and B. A is the true ending, and B is the regular ending. How to get the regular ending? Do whatever, Some maybe send some inheriors, maybe send barely anybody. You have to send someone or an artifact at the end of each chapter, otherwise you'll get the bad ending, okay? So you gotta have some leeway. So just send the 1 or 2 inheriors or 1 or 2 artifacts at the end of each chapter, and that's it, you'll get the ending. You won't get what's important about Lenneth and Lucian, though, but you get your Lenneth going to Asgard and blah blah blah. I'm not gonna spoil the ending, but it's just a bare bones ending, to be completely honest. When I beat the game the first time, I got that ending, and I was like, man, really? You beat the final boss? Each ending has a different final boss, by the way. So you beat ending B, final boss, and then there's barely any cutscenes or dialogue, and it's just the credits, and it's just no. It feels kind of bad. However, to get the true ending, oh my god, you gotta use a guide. Okay, it's indispensable, because you gotta send specific inheriors and a specific amount of them every chapter, and only a specific amount of artifacts, and specific artifacts. It's not just the amounts. It's not like, oh, I'll just send 2. No, you gotta send this in this chapter, this in this other chapter, and it's, come on. And there's very, very specific things you need to do in order to get locked into the true ending, which is what you want. Is the true ending longer than the regular ending? A little bit, you get a little bit more, a couple of extra boss fights, and it's a little bit longer, but not really. It isn't a substantial difference in terms of gameplay. In terms of story, oh boy, it definitely is. And you get the development between Platina, who's basically Lenneth, and Lucian, and all of their arc and the ending, which is worth it. Now you get the true ending is very worth getting. All the events and dialogue make it worth it. It's kind of weird, but we'll get to that in the end of this episode. I'll let you know when I'm about to enter spoilers, but for now, don't worry, this is still a spoiler-free video. So it is highly recommended to get a true ending, even if it's your first playthrough. Don't worry, get it. Get a guide. Don't be ashamed to use a guide. It's almost... No. It's impossible to get the true ending without using a guide. Fucking possible. Okay, so use a guide. Yeah, but if you're that guy who never uses a guide, then it's your problem. You'll never get the true ending. It's almost impossible to figure it out, You gotta use a guide. Okay, so now you're probably thinking, what are you talking about? Inheriors, are the warriors you recruit, and are they party members? Yeah, I've been telling you that, but what about these artifacts? Okay, so here we go. Valkyrie Profile, unlike the second game, which is pretty linear, you go from, it's a traditional style game, you go from town to town, overworld and dungeons and blah. This is not the same. You do have a lot of towns, you do have a lot of dungeons and ruins and caves and blah, 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 forests, but you don't have to complete them in a specific order. You're there in the overworld, you can fly around with Lenneth, and you can use your sensor thing, to sense which... So what I explained at the very beginning, how she finds these warriors who are about to die, and she wants to go and take a look because she thinks they are worth recruiting for the war, So that's how she comes across Arngrim and Jelanda at the beginning. But after that, this is where you also get the tutorials during all of these segments, But once that's done, you're on your own. The game just lets you, and I'll never forget the first time I played this game. I was like, what am I supposed to do now? And I went to some dungeons and caves, and I completed them, and nothing happened, And I was like, what? So what do I do? But that is what you need to do. Just roam around. And this is why it's better to use a guide to this game. This game is almost impossible to figure out without a guide. So even if you're aiming for the neutral ending for ending B, you also might need a guide just to decide what to do next or where the hell you're supposed to go, because it's one of those games a bit cryptic, and that is the reason why a lot of people reject this game. That's the main reason. There's another reason, we'll get to that, but the main reason why a lot of people don't like this game is because of this, because it's like, where the fuck do I go? It is that type of game, sadly, and I often complain about that. So that's why Valkyrie Profile, I fucking love it passionately, and I think it's a masterpiece, but it's not in my top 20 best favorite JRPGs of all time for that. because it forced me to use a guide even for the normal boring ass ending, ending B. So it is like that. But basically, once you figure it out, you go into the towns where most of these characters are that you need to recruit, and actually there's an easy mode and a normal mode at the beginning of the game. If you're playing on easy, you can't recruit certain characters. Keep that in mind. And on normal mode, you can recruit most of them. It's also, you need a guide for most of them. Some are pretty obvious. Some you just roam around, use your senses, and they will appear. The scene will appear in a specific town, and then you go there. Whenever Lynette goes into town, she changes into her Platina form with a human dress, and no wings and no armor, and not even the braid. So she just goes around, in exploring the town. Some of these towns have shops, you know the drill. It's not really a game about that, let me tell you that, but we'll get to that part. So that's how you recruit characters, and you get to see their scenes and complete their missions. Sometimes they may lead to regular missions in a forest or in this place, and you gotta complete the dungeon. Or sometimes you just get into a boss fight and you beat the boss fight, and that's it. So some of these artifacts that I mentioned are found within chests, usually at the end of any dungeon. You don't have to recruit a character you can just go into a random fucking dungeon and you see the artifact at the end in the chest, and without even having to fight a boss. Okay, some artifacts are found that way, so that's what you need to do: find these artifacts. So it's a good idea that if you get lost in this game and you don't know what to do or where to go, just go into a random place you've never visited, a random dungeon, and try to beat it, and get the artifact, But it's better to use a guide, regardless of the ending you're aiming for. Okay, so that's basically it in terms of the overall gameplay and exploration. You just go around in the sky, with a amazing music theme by Motoi Sakuraba. So, just real quick, the music is amazing in this game. I think this is the best soundtrack ever composed by Motoi Sakuraba. And trust me, I have played almost every single Tales game. Actually, I have played almost every single Tri-Ace game. Even some of the ones that never left Japan. So I've played a lot of fucking games where the soundtrack is composed by Motoi Sakuraba. And this fucking game is the best, in my opinion, of course. Second best, the sequel, but this is better. The soundtrack in this game is better than in the sequel, my opinion. And also the third game, Covenant of the Plume, same, amazing fucking soundtrack. So the Valkyrie Profile trilogy, in my opinion, is the three best fucking things Motoi Sakuraba as a composer has done. There's this, I don't even know how to describe it. There's this mystique about it, It's kind of different from the second game. The second game has a lot of mystic themes, but also depressing themes. And okay, I talked about that. But in this game, the melancholic themes feel a bit different. They don't feel as sad. They feel more as reflective, because it's a game about reflection, about Lynette herself reflecting about the events she's witnessing and living through, and about her memories. So there's some kind of melancholia in the music, but also more about nostalgia and more about reflection. Themes that you listen to most of the soundtrack in this game and you're just sitting on your ass and thinking, and you just go off and you start drifting, That's what the music makes you do, because that's how, he really nailed it. The composer really nailed it for what the story writers were going for with this game. It's a beautiful soundtrack. And also the battle themes are also kind of like very Motoi Sakuraba. You listen to that and you're like, this is the guy from the Tales series, They sound pretty similar. I don't think this is a game that stands out a lot in battle themes, but the regular battle theme is god tier and everybody knows it, especially because at the beginning of every battle, random battle or boss battle, you got Lynette saying, "To my side, my carriers," so it's awesome, right? So, and it's a really exciting battle theme, but it never goes like super overboard, not metal, it's just like very exciting, but it makes you feel like you're there in this time and age of I don't know. Well, it's in the second game. You get some themes that feel out of place. They're still fucking badass, but they're out of place. And this game also has a couple of themes that are like, okay, but that's Motoi Sakuraba for you. He makes things interesting in the music. I appreciate that a lot. So amazing soundtrack, really appreciate it. It has some, when it goes dark, the dark themes that sound are like really appropriate and atmospheric, and the battle themes and the dungeon themes and the world map theme is one of the fucking best world map themes of all time. It just makes you feel all of that I just explained to you about reflection and nostalgia. It's amazing. This is by far Motoi Sakuraba best soundtrack of all time. So going back to the gameplay, sorry about interrupting it with the music. So going back to the gameplay, another thing that a lot of people don't like is, well, this is a game that's in town, and in the dungeons it's split in 2D. In towns you're not gonna have a problem. But in the exploration in 2D in the dungeons, well, Lenedis, she moves and controls a bit slippery. And this is a game with a lot of platforming. This was greatly improved in the sequel, thankfully. Not perfect, still not perfect in the sequel, but greatly, the difference is abysmal. If you play both games, you're gonna be like, oh my god, the platforming in this first Valkyrie game. I'm not gonna say it's ass, because it's not, but damn it, man, it's one of the game's fatal flaws. And that's the only thing about the game that it didn't age well. It's like this is a game that aged masterfully. It's still amazing to play nowadays. And if you play it on PS5 with upscale graphics, it's even better, And by the way, that version is fine. I don't remember. I know I didn't beat it on PS5, okay? But I don't remember the game having any frame rate or resolution issues. It may have some frame rate issues if you're like, during battle, for example, when there's a lot of animations happening at the same time. I don't think Sony did a great job, but it still looks great. Okay, so I can vouch for that version, but the versions that I beat and play the heck out of it are the PS1 and PSP versions. Okay, keep that in mind. But the game looks beautiful on PS5. That's all I wanted to say. But it isn't a remaster. It's just they upscale the graphics. That's all they did. So the platforming in the side-scrolling in this game, Lenny is just very slippery. She can shoot crystals, to create small platforms and jump on them, to reach another platform or another area, another door, But even doing that is a bit of a pain in the ass, because when you want her to be slippery, she's not, and when you want her to be stiff, she's not. So it's very hard to control Lennon. That's what I'm saying. I think it's the game's fatal flaw. I don't think the cryptiness is a fatal flaw, because there are guides on the internet, that you can use. But the game's biggest flaw, and there's nothing you can do about that. It's this slippery platforming, You're gonna jump around and fall through platforms, or fall when you weren't. When you know for a fact you jumped correctly. You pressed the button when you needed to, and she fucking fell. It's annoying. I need to get that off my chest, because I know it's a problem, and I know a lot of you will agree with that, So leaving that out of the way, the rest of the gameplay is awesome. I like the dungeon design a lot. It's a little puzzle-like in the platforming sense, but also in the sense that you get this. It isn't linear, The dungeon design isn't linear, as in you start from the left and then you go all the way to the right. Now, it is in some dungeons, but you have other areas you can visit in between. I'm not gonna use the word Metroidvania, even though I just did. It's not like that, What I'm trying to say is that you can just backtrack and back and forth to visit different areas, because you will get to that specific area that's a dead end, or that has only a chest, and you're gonna need to backtrack and find the way to the boss or to the treasure chest. Okay, so it is like that. The exploration within the dungeons, it can feel a little Metroidvania-like, okay, but not really. And it isn't overwhelming, as in a fucking Metroidvania, So that's great. The exploration is great. It encourages you to go, especially because there's no random encounters. Thank goodness. Dude, no random encounters. Not only that, you can just jump over the enemies sometimes, and which is a great fucking thing. Or use the crystals, So it's great, because that encourages exploration. This is a game where I think on my first playthrough, maybe not, but on my second playthrough, I did explore every fucking corner you can imagine. So yeah, this is one of those games. In some areas, I 100%ed it. You know how I'm usually not that guy, but well, for this game, I was. All right. Another thing you need to know is that, well, I already explained the warriors and how you recruit them. Sometimes you need to beat a dungeon and the boss. You will find sometimes these enemies that are maybe too tough for you, even in regular dungeons. This is something I didn't like. I think a lot of people like, but I didn't, because I felt like, why do you put this enemy here when you know it's gonna kick my ass at this level? Well, it has a lot to do with how the game is non-linear. So it doesn't. So they develop these monsters. They program them to be strong because maybe there was a possibility you will be visiting that area when you were strong enough. So that's interesting, but it's also frustrating. So keep that in mind. You will find these enemies are like, what the fuck, man. Anyway, so and that leads me to the battle system. This is a turn-based RPG, but it's not on real time. Not on real time. A lot of people think this is a combination between action and turn-based. I can see why. So, just like in the second game, every character, you can only have 4 characters, a maximum of 4 characters per battle, and each character is a button, an action button in your PlayStation controller. Triangle, square, X, and circle. Okay, including Lenneth. Lenneth is mandatory. She needs to be there. She doesn't need to be square, or is she? I don't remember. Is she? Oh my god. Can you put her in the triangle button? I don't think so. I think she's square button no matter what. She needs to be in the front. But regardless, she's a mandatory character. She's going to be there forever, okay? But your other 3 party members, can be optional. As you recruit more characters, you can put them in your party, At this point, you're probably going to ask me, which character should I send, follow a guide. I'm not going to answer that, because if you want a true ending, you need to follow a guide. You can actually have some liberties, If you follow a guide, the guy's not going to tell you specifically who sometimes, okay? Sometimes it will, but sometimes he's like, for this chapter, just select 2 inheritors, and you can choose them, okay? So, Arngrim cannot be sent, obviously, for plot reasons, and even if you could, it will be fucking stupid for you to send him, because he's the best fucking character in the game. Sure, he's a bit weak against magic, but he's a powerhouse. Even the first several hours of this game, you will notice once you start doing damage to your enemies, he does by far the most damage. And his special attack, badass, broken. This guy's fucking broken, man. Later, depending on her equipment and her, native abilities, as you make progress, Lenneth also becomes really fucking powerful, but no one beats Arngrim. And there are others. There's this samurai guy, forget his name, who's also really powerful. If trained correctly, he's also really powerful. The girl that I mentioned before, the girl with the green armor that forgot her pants, that's a feature of the Valkyrie Profile series. A lot of girls that are armored up, except in their pelvic area, I don't know why, just for the sake of sexiness, I guess. And she's super sexy. She's also like really powerful, but she's also kind of weak. 2-3 hits and she's dead, She's not one of the best characters in the game, but I really liked her. Okay, but Arngrim is like one of the best fucking characters. You always want to have a mage. This is my personal recommendation. You always want to have a mage in the circle button at the back, and 2 attackers and Lenneth, okay? So that's my advice. Mistina is the best fucking mage in the game. I've heard some good things about Yolanda, but I don't like that character, so I never really used her a lot, other than the first few hours of the game. There's other mages that are really cool and powerful, but I think Mistina is the best. She was my favorite, so put her in your party if you want to. Why is this formation important? Well, probably because a JRPG, and you always need in JRPGs, especially turn-based, to have a balanced formation. I don't know, it might be that. Now, up to you how you approach this game. There are several tips online. Everybody's going to think different. This is how I think. These are my strategies, and this is what worked for me twice. Okay? So, the battle system is, as you already know, or maybe not. You have 1 character attached to each button, but there's an AP bar. So, the AP bar, it keeps increasing as you advance, but let's just say it's got 50 points. Okay? And during your turn, every character's action costs points. So Lenneth, for example, can use 3 types of attacks. Eventually, as you start growing and leveling up, characters learn more abilities. But you can only equip these moves or abilities or attacks. You can only equip like 2 or 3 per character. Okay, and so let's say you equipped Lenneth with 3 attacks. Okay, and the first attack costs like 5 points. Second attack costs 10 points, and the third attack costs 5 points again. So with Lenneth alone, you have 20 out of 50. Now you get where I'm going, right? So if Arngrim has like 2 attacks that are cost 10, you will only be able to use Arngrim and Lenneth. Or you can only use 1 attack with Arngrim, 1 attack with Lenneth, and 1 attack with the mage, and 1 attack and 2 attacks with the warrior in the triangle button. So it's the same in the second game. Okay, so how you will use that's completely up to you. Okay, I usually start the battle. It also depends on the enemies. Okay, most of the enemies can be just destroyed with magic, or it's just better to use magic at the beginning of the assault. So just use 1 magic attack with your mage, and then just button mash the other controllers. That's what I do. The second game is a little bit more button mashy than the first one, but you can also use the same mindless strategy for most battles. But this, okay, so both games are super hard, especially the second one. But ironically, in the second game, button mashing saves you more often than in this one, because this is a bit more technical, and button mashing mindlessly might not be the best thing with some enemies. So it depends on the enemy, okay, and it also depends how many enemies, because sometimes these enemies dodge you, and you just wasted that attack. So it's not like that. And in the second game, the button mashing feels more simultaneous, as in you just button mash all of it, but the first attacks, are like ignored. So you need to be a little bit more technical with this, a little bit more patient, and attack with more pacing, okay? And that's how it is. Every time, just like in the second game, every time you fill up the bar to 100%, you can execute 1 special attack, And also special attacks cost action points, but on this special bar, you got 2 bars. The bars for the special attacks and the bar for the regular attacks. So the special attacks use action points of the special bar, of the special attack bar, okay? So you also need to be, just like in the second game, decisive with the order and strategic with the order, so you can get almost everybody to use a special attack. Okay, so that's up to you. I don't want to get into that, because that's something you will find out on your own while doing battle. Okay, so that also helps a lot. It's an incredible battle system. I fucking love it. It is one of my favorite battle systems of all time. Obviously, I prefer the second one a lot more for reasons that I explained in that episode. But man, I gotta say that I really admire the creativity, because this was kind of original for its time, and then other games became inspired by it. So while it isn't 100% one of the most unique battle systems ever, it's still kind of unique, and it adds up a little bit more to the challenge. It's not just about the strategy, it's also about timing and about thinking which character to attack first, to use first, or which special attack to use first, and it's just a lot of fun. A lot of fun. You will probably end up loving this battle system a hell of a lot, just like me and every goddamn fan out there of this game. Finally, the equipment system and the skill system. Just like in the second game, the skill system relies a lot on the equipment system, but it's different. In the second game, you get all these colors and you get passive skills, and it's convoluted, and I already explained that, okay? Here, there's nothing of the sort in this game, thankfully. It's a little bit more traditional, So as a result, there's not that much to say. And I haven't played this game in a while, so this is the one part of the game that I don't remember that much, but it is important. It is important in the sense that this is a difficult game, like I told you, it is a technical game, so equipment system matters a lot here, and you will get some artifacts, actually, that are equipment, that are weapons or armor. And you might find out, according to the guy, that it is in your best interest to send this or that. While in reality, you were like, oh my god, I'm going to equip this sword to Landon because it's so powerful. And it is. You equip Lenneth with that sword that you found, and you gotta like you go into battle, and she destroys everybody, But all of a sudden, you need to send it. It sucks. It's like hurtful, But it's all for the sake of a really well written story. Like this is one of the best stories I've seen in a JRPG. A long time ago, I made a top 10 best JRPG stories, and it might even need an update, that video, but Valkyrie Profile was there in the top 10, and if I remade that video, if I remake that video one day, Valkyrie Profile is still gonna be there. It's such an incredible story. So it is worth sacrificing power just for the sake of the plot, if that makes any sense. Alright, so it's been a while. Let's wrap it up with the spoiler section. I could go deeper into this, but this is it. It's enough. So let's wrap these things up with the spoilers. Some interesting things to say about that. So if this is where you're tuned out and you haven't played the game, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thank you for being a member. And I'll see you next time. Spoilers start in 3, 2, 1... Okay, let's go back to Lucian. Lucian's development depends 100% on the true ending route, because he knows inside of him that Lenneth is Platina, and that's her body, fully grown now, because the soul of Lenneth and the other sisters are mature, like grown-ass women, And that's why when Lenneth's soul gets transported to inside Platina's body, that's why her body is no longer a 14-year-old girl, So she grows up, but she also remains static. Being static is a thing that applies for most characters that are gods, that live in heaven, in Asgard, except for Odin, because he's a half-elf. Something that isn't revealed to you until later in the game. That's also a spoiler. But if you're here in the spoiler section, you already know that. So it's interesting how Lucian knows for a fact that's his childhood friend, and obviously he's in love, and obviously he knows Platina was in love with him before she died, and because Lenneth's soul is in Platina's body, it becomes her body, and it absorbs her memories, which is when at some point of the game Odin finds out what's going on and what Lenneth is doing, and trying to do. This is exclusive to the true ending, and then Lucian dies in Asgard, So all of these events lead to Lenneth not exactly having some kind of breakdown, but kind of like losing complete faith in heaven, in Asgard, and in the war. And that's when she starts saying, okay, I'm gonna fight from now on for the humans, and I'm gonna defeat all these motherfuckers and become the ultimate goddess. And that's it. We'll get to that. But what I wanted to say first is that if Platina was the body of Lenneth, at some point of the game, if you guys remember this, Odin finds out and he performs the Sovereign's Rite, so Lenneth's soul can get out of the body, and then Christ, the elder sister, can go in her place and inside the girl's body, and continue her job. But at this point of the game, other characters were like very loyal to Lenneth, not to Christ, like Arngrim, for example, Mistina. So they're like, no, fuck you, we're fighting you, and this is where you go and meet Brahms, the Lord of the Undead, who has Silmeria's soul trapped. I'm not going to get into that because this is something about the second game, and I explained that, I talked about that in the second game. So it's really interesting how this happens in this game, but that just begs the question, so what was Christ in Platina's body? So Christ became Platina, and as soon as someone becomes one of the three Valkyries get inside the body, because it is said at the beginning of the game and explained explicitly, in the game and the lore of the game, and if you read articles or the Wikipedia article, it does say that the three sisters have no bodies, and they share the same body, and this body is Platina. So what the fuck, man? So how come? This is one inconsistency that I found in this game a long time ago when I first played it. I was like, so Christ should have absorbed Platina's memories, and she should have known about Lucian, right? And I think, if I remember correctly, she kind of does, but she doesn't act accordingly. So this is why, well, that's an inconsistency, but at the same time, on the other hand, it also kind of makes sense because Lenneth, I mean, every girl, Silmeria, Kristen, and Lenneth, are different. They have different personalities, different feelings. And so that's why Lenneth so resonated more with Platina's personality and memories. That's the best. That's how I make sense out of this situation. So eventually Lenneth gets her body back, Platina's body back, and she's fully on Lucian. She retains her memories because every time Valkyrie completes her job, her soul leaves the body. Odin takes care of that, and puts the soul to sleep and removes all of her memories. So that's interesting how Lenneth reacquires the memories of herself, of Lenneth, and also the memories of Platina when she gets her body back, and then she remembers Lucian, and then the rest of the game happens, So going back full circle to Lucian, okay, now that we've seen the true ending, now that we've seen all the events, I get it, but I think Lenneth, well, okay. This was, I don't agree with this relationship because Lucian, I don't think he's a good husbando for Lenneth. I always felt Lucian was just a nobody, like a generic character. But yeah, I guess he grows on you because of the things he does. He desperately finds, he confirms. First, he suspects a lot that Platina is Lenneth, and then he confirms that, and then he tries to find his way to that, and then he dies. And then Lenneth gets pissed off because of that. And then at the end, if you get the true ending, Lucian revives and lo and behold, they're together again. Okay? So, fine. I like Lucian. Now, you gotta beat the game to really say, okay, this guy wasn't that bad. But still, I think Lenneth could have gotten a better guy. I don't know, man. Just no. Anyway, so but he was Platina's childhood love interest and the one that set her free, and that's a big deal for Platina, so it makes sense. The relationship makes sense. But yeah, Lucian is still an alright character, not one of my favorite characters. Arngrim is still better, more interesting, Mistina, or even Lazard, but he gets to shine way more in the second game. Alright, so the ending of this game, the final boss is Loki. In the regular route, if I remember correctly, the final boss is Surt, but in the true ending, the final boss is Loki. And I don't have a lot to say about that boss fight. I know that's going to disappoint some of you. You're expecting me to discuss that, but to be completely honest, that is the expected outcome of the game. That's an awesome boss fight, but it's not that awesome. And it's not like I'm gonna nerd out about it, No, it's just a cool final boss. It is as expected, Obviously, I was expecting, to be honest, I was expecting Odin and Freya as the final bosses, and really powerful forms or something, and you had to fight them both at once or in a row. First Freya and then Odin. So I don't know, and then you get Loki. And yeah, you get some Loki development throughout the game. There's some scenes with him, and his life in Asgard, but it's not that much. It's just not enough. So I'm not saying I was disappointed by the boss fight or the final boss. I was just saying that it met my expectations. I liked it. I beat the guy, finished the game, got my true ending, and I was happy, So the last thing I want to say is that I don't feel like the ending was a good idea. Let me go all the way back about an hour ago when I was claiming this game is pretty much anti-politics and anti-system and anti-corporation and all that, and anti-power and blah, blah, blah. So then Lenneth, the true ending means Lenneth defeats everybody, and then she becomes the lord and lordess of the fucking Asgard and Midgard, of all humans. So she becomes God, practically. I don't like that. I don't like that because this was all about defeating power and showing people that they didn't need these higher powers, which is a lot of JRPGs do that, about fighting God. It's not about, fighting the Catholic God and Jesus Christ. No, it's about fighting a higher power, to prove that they do not need a higher power controlling them or overseeing them, that they can make decisions for themselves and blah blah blah. That's the message of a lot of JRPGs. So in that area, this is the same. But then you get this ending, and now Lenneth is the goddess, so she's the ultimate authority, you know? And then you get to the second game. And the second game, she just... what? Wasn't she the super ultimate fucking goddess? So which ending is the second game following? And that's where it gets so confusing. I think I remember mentioning this when I did the episode of Silmeria, of the sequel, that the connection between both games took a lot of liberties, you know, and the story went off the rails in some areas because it tries to connect it with the first game, but not really because it's an alternative timeline. But then you meet in the second game the Lizard and the Lenneth of the first game. The main Lenneth and Lizard of the first game are the ones you see in the second game. Everybody else is from this different timeline or alternative universe, you know, but Lenneth and Lizard are all the same guys. You know, so how is that possible considering Lenneth became the ultimate goddess according to the true ending? So the game's not following the true ending of the first game? So, I don't know, man. This is a conversation that maybe I would like to have with other people, other fans. Maybe one day we can talk about this game, but it's just a game that leaves a lot for speculation. But regardless of its connection with the second game, let's pretend the second game didn't exist. Let's pretend Valkyrie Profile is a standalone game and that was the only one in the series. It is in the series. I'm still not happy with that ending because the whole point is so Lenneth can become Platina, you know, and destroy the whole goddess and Valkyrie system so she can probably live happily ever after with Lucian and maybe have kids and that's it, you know, and all humans, you know, looking after themselves, you know, with no gods to oversee them or oppress them, you know, or control them. That was the whole point, but you're telling me she becomes the goddess of well, that's the part of the ending that I don't like, you know, but the ending is still about that, about humans being free, and now you guys are on your own, and Lenneth can be with Lucian, and that's it. So that part of the ending I do like. It's great. I just don't feel comfortable with the fact that there's like, I mean, she's the goddess of the... no. Just no. That's all I had to say about this game. Okay, so, incredible. Hey, I skipped the graphics. Well, should I? It's just fucking beautiful. You already know that. It's one of those games you play it and you'll see the graphics and you'll be like, yeah, it's fantastic. But I know the art style, the 2D character art style. I mean, not the 2D. The 2D, you know? Not the pixel art. Okay, the pixel art and in-game graphics, incredible. But I know the 2D art style isn't for everybody. The characters look, I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan. I like it. It's very unique, but I'm not the biggest fan. Let's leave it at that. Yeah. All right. So that's it, guys. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. Thank you very much for watching. It might not be a bad idea to listen to this episode first and then the second one, or the second one first. Well, I did an episode based on the second one a long time ago, so maybe most of you probably already come from listening to that episode before this one, but that's okay. I needed to do this in this order because I played the second one first and then this one. So I'm relaying my experience, how I lived it with both games, when in reality I should have made an episode of the first game first and then the second one, just for the sake of you guys, but nah. Thank you. See you next time.